instance variable versus local variable, right? Now, what are these? In Java, we have basically three types of variables, right? If I create a new class, just name it as a home class, right? So there are generally three types of variables. One is instance variable, then we have the local variable, and then there are some class type variables, right? Now, what are these? If I talk about instance variables, right? Anything that is declared inside the class body, as in this is the class body, the open curly braces and the closed curly braces. Anything that is declared over here, like int I equal to 1, 2, 3, right? So these are called as instance variables, right? And anything that is declared inside the method body are called as local variables, right? These are declared inside the method body, right? So anything that I declare, let's say public void go, any variable that I declared over here, and j equal to 2, 3, 4. So this is basically a local variable. Now, why these are local variables, or why we also call this instance variable as a global variable as well, right? A global variable. Now, why global variable? Because we can access this variable throughout the class. Throughout the class, anywhere we can access this variable, right? But we cannot access this variable outside this method, right? So this is a local variable which is accessible within this method only, right? So the range of this variable is within this method only, whereas this variable can be accessed throughout the class. So what I can do, I can even call the value of I over here, and I can change the value of I over here to something else, right? I can call this, I can create one more method, public void show, and I can change the value of, I can again keep some other value of I over here, right? Because this is a global variable, it can be accessed throughout the code. But if I create any variable within the method, the scope of that variable will always be within that method only, right? But if you really want to change this value of j over here or outside this, if you write it like this, then you're gonna get some error. Compiler will ask you that it will actually gonna tell you that j cannot be resolved to a variable, right? Even you cannot write it outside, it will not able to understand it, what exactly this j is, right? We are getting some errors over here, right? So this is not possible. The scope is limited to this method only. Now let us do some experiment over here. Let me change the value of I to 10, right? And what I'll do, I'll go to my previous class and I'll just call the value of I over here. So I'll go inside the main method, I'll just comment out this piece of code, and I'll call this I over here. So how are we going to call this I? In order to call this, I actually need to create an object of this class. So I'll say home h equal to new home, right? Otherwise, this learning method class will not gonna know what this I is, because this I belongs to a different class. So if you want to call any member of this home class inside a second class, inside a different class, you actually need to create an object of that class, right? So when I say h dot I plus plus, let's say I've written h dot I plus plus, just give me a moment. right? And I'll create one more object of this class by saying h1, right? And then I'll say h1 dot I. I'll again call this I plus plus. Then again create another object of this class, right? And here I'll not gonna increment the value of I. I'll just gonna print I over here, right? Now tell me what it should print. The initial value of I is 10, right? So here I'm incrementing the value of I, here I'm incrementing the value I, and here I'm just printing the value as it is. So if I execute this statement, what it should actually print? Should it print 11, should it print 12, or should it print 10? What it should actually print? Just think of it. Just think of it, right? Just give 2 minutes of your time and just think of it. What this thing will actually gonna print. So as soon as I execute it, this will actually gonna print 10 only, right? Now why? What happens over here? Now whenever we are creating an object over here, we have created an object over here. Now this h is actually a reference. It is actually holding one object over here, right? It is actually holding the copy of this class, right? And the I is actually accessed through this object, and the value of I remains 10. And when we when we increment, when we say I plus plus, then this object 1 actually increments. This I is actually called by the object 1, and it increments the value of I to 11. And same thing happens over here. So here another copy of object is created by the reference h1. This is a new copy of this class that is being created. A new object is being created, right? This is my second object. It is also holding the value of I as 10, right? And then same way we are incrementing the value of I, and it becomes 11, right? And here we have h2. This is the third object. This is the third object reference, right? So we have three different copies of the class are actually created over here. And again, the value of I is 10 over here. And when we print the value of I, it remains 10, and it gives the answer as 10, right? So this is how this is what happens in an object orientation programming, right? How we declare objects, and how we create an object of a class, and what is the reference, and how we actually going to call methods from class. So the moral of the story is, whenever you're creating an object of a class, it actually holds the entire copy of this class, right? And these variables, if you talk about these variables, these are actually, these variables belongs to the instance of this class, right? So whenever you are creating different object of a class, and whenever we are changing the values of these variables, so these variables are actually copied to the object of a new class, object to the new object of the same class, right? These values are not changed in the initial class. These are actually changed in the copy of this class which that particular object holds, right? So every object will gonna hold the copy of this variable. Every object, as in every instance of that class, holds the copy of these variables. So that is the reason we call them as instance variable. Now next thing, we'll take a look at class variables. Now what are class variables? Okay, let me take an example. Let's say if I open MS Paint, right? Now let's say we are in a class, and let's say if I there are three notepads, right? I give you these three notepads, and I want that you to write any value of I. Right, you write as one. Someone has written as 11. Let's say someone has written as 10. Someone has written as 8. Right. Now, what is this? These are three different objects. Let's treat them as a different object of a same class. Right. The value was 1. The value was notepad, but on three notepads we have written different values, right? So we call them as an instance variable, right? We have actually called them as an instance variable, where we are actually creating three objects of a class. We are changing the values, but the class value remains as it is, right? If there is one notepad with me as well, and I've written I over here. So you have written the value of I as 10, someone else has written as 10, and someone else has written as 8, right? So in your notepad, the values are different, and whatever this is the major notepad that I am actually containing, if this has a value as 10 or anything else, so this belongs to this class. Right now, this value never gets changed. Only these values are being changed. Same way, what I if I do, let's say if I remove this thing, and if we have one common notepad, right? If we have one common notepad and we are actually sharing this notepad, so what happens? Initially, the value of I is 10. Now I have shared you the same notepad to the very first person. Now what he does, he changes the value of I to 11. So what happens? The value changes over here in this notepad. Same way, this person, it changes the value of I to 20. So the value actually changes over here. This person, he changes it to 30. Value changes over here. Right. Now, what I'm trying to say that if I make this thing as static. Now, what is static? We're going to talk about this thing as well in coming lectures. It's just to explain what the class variables are. I'm making this thing as static. Now, what happens if I make it static, and if I again go over here, and if now I run this statement, this code, then let's see what the value of I comes to. So it comes to 12, right? Because this time what is happening, this thing becomes static, and this thing actually becomes a class variable. It means that it belongs to this particular class, and whenever we are calling that particular class variable over here, we are actually changing the value of that class variable. So whatever that we changed over here, it gets changed to this class variable. And then when we call the same variable over here, we increment that value. It again calls this one, whatever the last value that it was holding, and it got incremented. And then we print it. So we are actually printing the same class value. We are not creating a copy of this class, right? In previous example, when we were calling the instance variable, we were actually creating a copy of this class, and then we were calling the instance variable. Now we are actually calling the class variable when we make any particular data member as static. So this is what your instance variable, local variable, and the class variable. So if we go back to the presentation, this is what we have seen, a difference between an instance variable, local variable, and there is one called as class variable, right? And then if we talk about accessing objects, method, and instance variable. So in a class, you will be dealing with, if I go back to Eclipse, you will be dealing with either the instance variables or the methods, right? These are the two things that you generally be dealing inside a class, right? So whenever the method and instance variable of any object can be accessed by the help of dot operator. So whenever you want to access them, you need to create an object of a class, and you need to create a reference variable. And whenever you say that reference variable with dot operator, you can access either the instance variable of that class or you can access the method of this class. So over here, this is a reference variable and this is an object of a class and this is the class name. So reference variable dot and the method that we have accessed. Alright, so based on whatever that we have discussed so far, we're gonna do some assignment, right? So this is an assignment for you. What you need to do is you basically need to create a calculator, right? Now, if I talk about calculator, there are various functionalities available in a calculator. As in, I can add something, I can subtract something, I can multiply something, I can divide something, right? So what you need to create, you need to create some methods that should okay, you need to create 4 methods, one for addition, one for subtraction, one for multiplication, and one for division. Now there are some rules. All the methods, they have the return types as integer, right? So the return type of these methods should be integer, and then these methods will, every method will gonna have 2 parameters and all the parameters will be of int types, right? So this is what you need to design, and then we're gonna see how we can call these methods, right? So this is an assignment for you. Just try for it. I'll wait for 2 minutes and then I'll let you know the solution. So just give it a thought, try it on your own, and then I'll also gonna provide you a solution to this. All right.